Have you ever faced a situation so painful, so unfair that you couldn't imagine anything good coming from it? Maybe you've even asked yourself, why would God allow this to happen to me? Today we're going to be diving into a story that shows us that God can take our greatest challenges and turn them into something incredible. Welcome back to the Passages Unlocked. We attempt to unlock the Bible one verse at a time. My name is Jim Murrell, and today we're going to be exploring Genesis chapter 50 and verse 20, a verse that reminds us of God's ability to work all things together for good. Now, to build this up, we've got to get some background and set the proverbial table. So let's step back for just a moment to look at the story and the life of Joseph to try to understand the context of his triumphant statement. It really begins back when he was a young man. You see, he was favored by his father Jacob, and he was gifted a coat of many colors. But Joseph was more than just his father's favorite. He was also chosen by God. You see, God gave him dreams of greatness, dreams that one day his family would actually bow down to him. But his brothers didn't take too kindly to these dreams. Jealousy consumed them, and they plotted against Joseph. Eventually, they sold him into slavery while faking his death to try to deceive their father. Imagine how Joseph must have felt, betrayed, abandoned, and utterly alone. Joseph ended up in Egypt, serving in the house of a man named Potiphar. There he worked hard to earn Potiphar's trust, but even in this, trouble eventually found him. He was falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, and Joseph was thrown into prison. Year after year had passed, and it seemed as if Joseph's dreams would never come true. But Joseph never gave up. He stayed faithful to God and used his God-given ability to interpret dreams even in prison. His gift eventually brought him in front of Pharaoh's attention. Through God's guidance, Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dreams, warning him of a famine and advising him of a plan to save the entire nation and, for the most part, the world around them. Pharaoh was so impressed that he elevated Joseph to second in command over all of Egypt. Years later, during the famine, Joseph's brothers came to Egypt seeking food. They had no idea that the brother they had betrayed was now the one standing between them and starvation. When Joseph finally revealed himself, his brothers were terrified. They thought that he would take revenge, but Joseph's response was one of the most powerful statements of faith and forgiveness of the entire Bible. Now we get to our passage, Genesis 50 and verse 20. In Genesis 50:20, Joseph says this, "But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about, as it is, this day to save many people." What an incredible perspective. Joseph did not deny the evil that his brothers had done. He actually acknowledged their intentions, but chose to focus on God's greater purpose. Instead of letting bitterness control him, Joseph trusted that God had been with him all along. This verse teaches us a profound truth. No matter what we face, God can even take those darkest of moments in our lives and use them for His glory and our good. Now, we must consider Joseph's positive attitude and forgiving spirit. Joseph's life wasn't easy, but he demonstrated remarkable faith, perseverance, and even forgiveness. So then what does that teach us? First, it teaches us that we must have faith in God's plan. Joseph never lost sight of God's sovereignty, whether it was in Potiphar's house, in prison, or eventually in Pharaoh's palace. Joseph trusted that God was in control. He used every single opportunity to glorify God, even when times seemed hopeless. We must also notice Joseph's heart of forgiveness. When Joseph's brothers begged for mercy, he could have sought revenge, but Joseph understood that forgiveness was another part of God's plan. He chose to let go of the pain and instead to offer grace to his brothers. Now, we certainly can't overlook Joseph's positive attitude. He could have given in to despair, but instead, he stayed faithful and focused on God's promises. His positive attitude allowed him to be used by God in ways that you could never imagine. Now let's make application to ourselves today. You see, Joseph's story isn't just about what happened thousands of years ago. It's a message of hope for us today. Here are 3 lessons we can apply to our lives starting today to understand this account even better. Number 1, trust God's sovereignty in suffering. Life is full of challenges, but it's often hard to see the purpose behind the pain. But in Genesis chapter 50 and 20, we are reminded that God is always at work, even in life's darkest moments. He can take what others mean for evil and bring it to good for us. Now, here's a challenge. I want you to think about a hardship you have faced. Ask yourself, how might God be using this difficulty in my life in the past or in the present to help to strengthen me? Number 2, we have to choose forgiveness over bitterness. Forgiveness isn't easy, but it is necessary. Holding on to bitterness only deepens the wounds. Joseph's example shows us the power of letting go and trusting God's plan. Now, is there someone you need to forgive? Ask God for strength to help to release that hurt and offer grace to them instead. Number 3, stay faithful and positive. Joseph's journeys just simply teach us the importance of perseverance. Keep on keeping on, if you will. Even when life seems unfair, God calls us to stay faithful and to trust His timing. Now, the next time you face a challenge, focus on what you can control. Your faith, your attitude, and certainly your trust in God to help handle the rest. Now, friend, I understand it. I've been there, done it before, have the card to prove it. I know that life can often be overwhelming. But Genesis 50 and verse 20 is a reminder to us that no pain is wasted in God if we allow Him to lead our lives.